You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Greer. Let's get into the show.
So, welcome to another exciting episode of Idea Collider. I was delighted to be joined by Alex Telford. He's a biotech founder, writer, and thinker, a great thinker based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Co-founder of Convoke Bio, a company which builds software tools to streamline biopharma workflows, so things like lab management, data integration, collaboration. He has a background from the UK, from UCL, and writes extensively on his Substack, which is Liveware, if you want to go find him there, and his personal blog about the industry, about drug discovery, molecular biology, neuroscience, consciousness, AI, biorisk, decision-making, philosophy, and forecasting. And actually today I subscribed to a new magazine called Works in Progress. And I was delighted to see Alex turn up there with this remarkable article on about how we think about monoclonal antibodies and how we could, do things like increase manufacturing capacity to hundreds of thousands of tons, for example, and what that would look like if we were able to get there. So his work is usually, the reason I like his work is because it addresses the big questions, the role of serendipity in breakthroughs, regulatory impacts on the economics of drug development. So you can imagine why I follow him so closely. But yeah, follow him on X. We'll give you the details of his links at the end of this podcast. But enjoy, a really insightful interview. Alex.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. How's things?
Things are good.
So Alex, your writing, which I've been a fan of for a long while now, as you know, it often feels like this kind of collision between your kind of deep knowledge of kind of the hard science and the kind of big philosophy questions, biotech as a kind of industry in its own right, as a business and a quest for understanding life itself. Can you tell me a little bit more about your journey from UCL to kind of founding Convoke?
Yeah, so when I was young, I always thought I would be a scientist. So I studied, I was reading all the New Scientist and all the kind of science books and from a pretty young age. And then I couldn't pick between biology and chemistry, so I did biochemistry at university. That was my selection criteria. And then at UCL, I got really interested in synthetic biology and some of these sci-fi ideas of, okay, what can you do with biology if you project forward 50 years or 100 years? How can you develop entirely new organisms that we've never seen before? And how can you turn biology into engineering science? Those ideas are really interesting to me. And then I did my master's at UCL, and I realized that synthetic biology is really far from anything that's practical, at least back a decade ago or so. So, and all the work we were doing was really just making these toy synthetic circuits in the lab, or just these little toy systems that didn't have any practical purpose. And I think that experience turned me off a bit on going down an academic route, because I felt like I could be spending many years just playing around with ideas that were fun and cool, but actually weren't helping anyone in the real world.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, that's when I decided not to do a PhD, even though I had long thought that I was going to do a PhD and go into science. And I wanted to explore something a bit more applied. So I looked for roles in the pharmaceutical industry. One of our family friends worked in life sciences consulting. I had no idea that consulting was a career, or life sciences consulting was a specialty of consulting. And it sounded interesting enough, so I applied for some jobs. Got one in Switzerland, joining a small boutique firm in a tourist city called Lucerne. And we got acquired by a larger biotech consulting firm a few weeks into my job, but still I stayed around and it was fun. Had advising biotech and pharma companies on all sorts of things, from business development deals to market access strategy to just like primary market research, medical affairs, regulatory. So the whole gamut of work you can do as you take a drug from an idea to market.
Yeah.
And that experience was just really both interesting and also gave me a pretty good perspective of what you need to, everything you need to do to develop a drug, and obviously very complicated. And I just saw so many inefficiencies doing that knowledge work.
Yeah.
And when language models started getting more and more capable, I got pretty excited about language models as a technology to automate knowledge work broadly, and to reimagine knowledge work. So a lot of processes in the biotech industry are very artisanal. Everything is done on a one-off basis. A lot of service vendors, a lot of information that gets, you put a lot of effort into creating that information, and then that information just gets stored on a SharePoint somewhere and not looked at again.
Yep.
And I just felt like if you can build software products to automate those processes of knowledge synthesis, aggregation, and then even knowledge generation eventually, that is one way you can have a pretty big impact on the way work gets done in the industry and efficiencies. So that's what motivated me to start Convoke eventually.
Nice. So tell me a bit more about Convoke and what its remit is, what its mission is.
So the mission broadly is to try and accelerate the capacity to develop new drugs. So that's a pretty broad mission. But actually, most of the day-to-day stuff we do now is focus on applications of language models. So finding ways to use this new technology to make the industry more efficient. And we've narrowed down to start with on a few use cases that center around getting language models to process large amounts of information, documents, data coming out in the external world and generated by internal systems or teams, and then processing the information, structuring it, and creating data sets. So that's like one angle, is using language models to create data sets at scale. So one example is we've gone out and processed every clinical trial record we can find on the web, and we've structured it into a database of clinical trial results that is a tabular format, and then you can run analysis over it. So you can very easily ask a question like, what's the overall response rate for every drug that's ever been tested in second-line non-small cell lung cancer, something like that. And then we're trying to create data sets like this across like many different types of data sets, so like patent data sets of company deals, data sets of who's working on what target. And I think that because language models can process a volume of information, we can create a lot of new data sets that would otherwise be too expensive to create. And hopefully we can do something like, engender something like the Moneyball-ification of pharma decision making, where you can be a lot more analytical and data driven about decisions, because you now have the capacity to create these data sets at a very large scale, very granular data sets that can let you reason quantitatively and analytically about decisions. So that's one aspect of what we do. And then the other aspect is generation. So language models are good at both reading documents, synthesizing information, and then generating information. So we work with companies on just generating things like medical affairs documentation, plain language summaries, abstracts, bits of manuscripts, bits of investigators' brochures, and other regulatory documents, and also internal reporting as well. So, and that uses the capabilities the models already have and some of these proprietary data sets we're putting together.
Yeah, phenomenal. So I'm always fascinated because I have two questions. One is these kind of efficiencies. One of the problems we have with decision making, especially in the early phase, is around the kind of effectiveness of decisions as well as sort of efficiency of decisions. So do you address both with what you're looking at?
I think we hope to. I think we're a long way from reimagining the way that decisions are done in the industry. I think eventually we want to get there, and it would be like hubristic to say that we're going to be the reason why everything changes. But the way I think about it is the way the industry makes decisions is very fragmented and siloed right now. It's almost like a factory line, right? You have the people in discovery making a molecule and then deciding whether or not to advance it to the people in early clinical and the people in early clinical, shunted into late clinical, and then it goes to the commercial team. And I think you have this, because there's no like integrated decision-making process, you have these like errors get passed on the chain, or they never get, like a big problem doesn't get discovered until later, right? Like if a drug there's some consideration of maybe the commercials of a drug when you're in the discovery phase, but not so many. But then you get to late phase, late clinical, and then it's like, oh, well, now we've realized that actually there's some fundamental problem with this drug and we're not going to get reimbursement in Germany or something like that. So I feel like finding a way to integrate those decisions, so the people in early discovery are considering the entire potential, like every way you could develop this molecule and what that means for developability, manufacturability, commercial potential, I think you can bring a lot of those decisions earlier in the process because you can do an analysis so cheaply now. Like what would require a few $100,000 consulting study. Now you can do like language model aided decision making. You can do a lot of this like pretty rigorous analysis of future paths, potential TVPs, commercial landscaping. You can do that very early on with a few clicks of a button.
Yeah, and then that's really where we sit as well. That idea that one of the fundamental problems is that the pursuit of a single TPP is already killing decision making later on because you've already cut off a lot of the different paths that were available. But one of the things that limits people's ability to do that is just the ability to easily and quickly assess multiple paths to market, right? Because everyone knows there's not just one path for a molecule. But everyone behaves as if that's true, right? And so the industry loses things just by never looking at them.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is because the decisions get made a bit too late, right? It's like as you get further in development, you lock down what you can do. The most optionality you have is when you've just found the molecule, or when you're even just looking for a lead candidate.
Yeah.
Then you can change everything about it. You can change the molecular structure, you can change the manufacturing process, you can change the indications, and then as you get closer and closer to market, then you can change less and less.
Yeah.
So you want to try and explore as much as possible as early as possible, but we don't really do that because actually processing information is pretty expensive now because you have to, use expensive humans to do it and go and do all this research that takes a long time. So you can't actually interrogate all the possibilities before you had systems like, language models that can do some level of reasoning, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, no, I think that's really where we need to go next, 5-10 years is to address the kind of decision-making processes in companies and just how they go about that stuff. The biggest problem that we find is the kind of McKinseyization of, this is the process we have, let's improve it by 5%, without making it 10%, 5 or 10% less efficient on the way through without ever getting back to the real problems in the mix.
Yeah, that is something I worry about with just language model technologies and like AI broadly as it gets adopted in the industry. You don't want to, I think it's an opportunity to rethink how work gets done.
Yeah.
And to rethink some of the decision-making process because you're not constrained in the same ways you were before, right? Like if you think about a company structure, a lot of the hierarchy of a company is just a means to filter information. Like you have people lower in the company who do the very grunt analytical work of I'm reading every paper and I'm pulling out figures or something. And then the next level up is synthesizing that and then synthesizing it again. And then the executives maybe get a very high level polished deck that tells them like this is the decision or this is like the proposed decision and here's all the nice forecast model and everything. And I don't think you need to structure work that way anymore because you're not so limited by time. Like you can ask, a system like almost everyone's used ChatGPT at this point, but you can ask, language model based system and it can go and engage directly with the data for you. And it can perform this analysis on the fly that was very expensive to do before. So I think you'll have a lot more flattening of organizations where the decision makers are directly interacting with the data.
Yeah.
And what I don't want to happen with AI is, I should say language models, is that we have all these suboptimal processes, and then we just automate the suboptimal processes, and then we just lock them in. So we just have, we just like train the language models to make the same kind of bad decisions that we're making.
Yes.
And think about things in the same way. It's like, yeah, well, that's probably not what we should do. We should take a step back and think, how would we redesign decision making?
Yeah.
Now we have this powerful technology that can read 1,000,000 papers and it can look at my organization's entire knowledge and synthesize it for me.
Yeah.
You can rethink the process.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I wanted to get into. I know you were on Beyond Biotech recently, and you talked about things like clinical trial failure rates for sure, but also the idea of serendipity and discovery, which I'm a huge fan of. This kind of planned serendipity in the approach. But I know there was a lot of debate after that post. Have you got any sort of big questions that keep you up at night after that kind of conversation?
I mean, I think one of the questions in that post that we talked about in that podcast that we didn't really get to, but I find really interesting, and it's a bit on the topic of serendipity, is if you plot the number of drugs launched by every pharma company, you plot it on a line, like over time. Pretty much everyone launches drugs at the same rate.
Yes.
But actually, if you work with these companies, they're very different organizations.
Yeah.
They all have their different therapy areas, different platform technologies, different cultures. So why is it that everyone launches drugs at roughly the same rate? I think the thing that is maybe concerning is, okay, maybe there's some like fundamental rate of biological discovery, and these ideas are just in the air, and then some company's going to get to them. But no one company is particularly good at developing drugs, and maybe developing drugs is so hard that it's just not something that anyone can be good at, and it's just almost pure luck. I don't think that's true, but I think it is interesting that we haven't seen. We have like you have an opinion like maybe Lilly is doing very well right now, or maybe Vertex is good at developing drugs, but I don't think we've really seen a company that has been 2 or 3 times or 10 times better at developing drugs. Whereas in software, it's very obvious that you have these like orders of magnitude differences in company outcomes, and some companies are extremely good at developing technology and some are much less good, and it seems like the variance is much higher. But like all the pharma companies sort of cluster around the same revenue, they cluster around the same kind of performance, same market cap, and maybe they escape for a bit of time, like Lilly is doing right now, but then they often come back to the peer, they revert to the mean because of genericization among other reasons. So like. Yeah, so why is that? Like, can we find a way to develop drugs much better? Is that possible? Or are we limited by some constraint more fundamental?
Yeah. Do you think that's something to do with the kind of cycle times from kind of, the decision-making process to finding out whether you were right or not? Because, this is an industry, sort of 10, 20, 30-year cycles where you find out whether, that thing that you decided to do 20 years ago is going to be commercially viable. Software, I think, and even hardware and IT is a little bit faster cycling, right? To get to that was a disaster or that was a kind of great idea.
I think that is a huge part of it is, having worked across both industries now, the cycle time and the learning rate in software is so much higher because you can build a prototype in less than a day, and then you can show it to a customer, and then they can say, yes, I like this. Yes, I don't like this. I'll give you money. I won't give you money. And then you can iterate on that feedback.
Yeah.
So you could very quickly learn with your market, but it's actually very hard to learn from. You don't really get many signals from the market in a pharma company.
No.
All the signals even when you're even when you're commercializing, actually, the signals you get from the market are very diluted.
Yes.
Because you have payers and like so many stakeholders involved in making a drug purchase decision.
Yeah.
That it's actually it's actually pretty unclear for a long time how your is going or
absolutely. Yeah. And knowing what's contributing to your success or failure as well is you look at Novo, you look at Lilly, and you go, look, this was a perfect combination of opportunity and molecule. Whether they were great commercially, it's hard to say, but they were just there at the right time. And then drugs turned around sometimes from, as they pass hands within companies. So those kind of metrics that you would traditionally look at to see whether the decision that you made was a good one is, those are diluted already by the process.
And then the timelines are so long that the context gets lost. I mean, this is one area that I'm excited about AI. I mean, I think like pharma for many years has been talking about knowledge management systems, and it's like, okay, let's invest in making this great knowledge management system so we can use all the data we're generating and make it effective and accessible to the whole organization. But none of those have ever really panned out or been actually useful. But I actually do think with language models, you can build these accruing knowledge management systems that are actually useful. You can dump everything into a knowledge base, and you don't need humans to curate everything all the time and spend all this time on making it perfect and keeping it up to date. You can have language models doing that.
Yeah.
And then directly interfacing with the end consumers of that data to serve it up in the format that's relevant. So I think we can finally build good knowledge management systems, and that could be actually pretty powerful because you can transition from an organization where every piece of information is in people's heads, and maybe it's in some PowerPoints, but people lose those, to an organization where everything is centralized and you can, accrue that knowledge over time, and then your own AI system internally becomes steadily more and more intelligent and learns more from your data. Whereas something I've seen a lot working in consulting, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is if you work on a program for a long time, the people working on that program will leave, or they'll go somewhere else in the company.
Yeah.
And then the context gets lost. And then the amount of time, we've been working, like our firm had worked with a company on a particular asset longer than anyone on the team had, like individually. So we become almost a store of organizational knowledge for certain pieces of information.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, can you send us that? Did we do some market research 3 years ago? And did you guys do that? And can you send me the deck? And could you represent it? I think those kind of things will move more to software systems. And maybe then we can actually have this accruing knowledge so companies can learn more effectively from experience.
Definitely. On that kind of subject, I know Convoke looks at sort of software pain points in pharma, integrating that data workflow and so forth. What would you say is the sort of biggest inefficiency you've seen, maybe that inspired Convoke? How do you see AI kind of overlapping with that?
Well, the original inspiration was just working in consulting and seeing the work that my teams were doing to just pull information from many different sources. I think so much information is fragmented and siloed, and I think it's almost like a trite point to say that. But it's been a problem for a long time, and there's been no solution. Right? A lot of people have tried to solve it, but there's no solution. But I think that's the main problem: is everything is so fragmented, everything is so siloed. Every one decision you need to pull from so many different databases. I think part of the problem is just like the construction of the industry. Every decision is very multimodal, multifactorial. Like you have to consider, if you're making a drug, can you manufacture it? Can people pay for it? Will the regulators approve it? Can we show efficacy in a clinical trial? How do we formulate it? So it's like very necessarily complex multi-optimization problem. So I think just like informing decisions requires you to look at many different sources of information, sources of data, and pull it together. But I just felt like a lot of the actual interface between the data and the decision was very inefficient. Like you're logging into these antiquated systems, you're downloading an Excel, and then you're spending a bunch of time cleaning up things like, okay, is this drug name in this Excel the same as this drug name in that Excel? And, is this target the same as that target? And then like putting it together into an actual like data set.
Yeah.
And then finally you can go and make decisions and reason about that data set. I think that first process of going from the data's all out in the world or the organization to now we have a clean compiled data set that pulls together all these different pieces of information in a way that's like ready to help us inform this particular decision. That felt like it was taking way too long.
Yeah.
So I wanted to build better tools to help with that process of just searching for information, consolidating it together, and then cleaning and packaging it up. But I think like now that I've been working with pharma companies, I've also got a lot more interested in the document generation side as well. So, for like medical affairs, like how do we scale things like medical legal review? How do we scale things like writing compliant messages at scale?
Yeah.
I think these things are just, and like, how do we scale things like writing regulatory documents? These things take up a massive amount of time.
Yeah.
And, frankly, I think a lot of these tasks they're obviously not trivial. They require highly skilled people to do them, but they're not really, they are like programmatic in a sense. Like you put the data from one format into another format that fits the regulator's suitable preferences and fits their template they provide.
Yeah.
And I think that task of taking data from one format, whether it's tabular or like other unstructured format, and putting it into a template is a very common activity in the pharma industry broadly, and something that I think language models are like very well adapted to do. I think we're going to see, a lot of companies have already deployed internal tools to do document generation, and others are working with companies like ours to bring those capabilities in-house. And I think we're going to see that's going to be the first place, or that has already been the first place where we've seen a lot of inefficiency gains, is generating a lot of these templated regulatory documents or templated internal reporting documents.
Yeah. Which has been, I've been fascinated watching someone like Amgen. I know they were early adopters of that idea of, documentation's a really easy, addressable, problem that we can point AI towards. and they've gained 3 6 months, which is a big deal, for a big drug. But I think some of the more imaginative stuff is still to come. I think that, as you say, that, it's easy to look, how you can save, a few 100 million on some of those internal processes, but the kind of big, gains, I think, are probably still to be seen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them will be discovered
Mhm.
rather than, reasoned about from first principles. Like
Yeah.
we work with language models every day. We're trying to figure out how to best use them to solve our customers' problems. But just but we like constantly discover new ways, new techniques to use the models, new applications.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting technology because I think typically in software, you can reason about something you're trying to build, and then you can tell if you're going to build it before you try and build it. But with a language model, you don't really know what they can do and what they can't do. There's this massive, it's like a complex system that you can, send language to and get some language back. It's like it's like the Chinese room, right? You don't know exactly how it's operating in there, how much it knows. Is it really understanding you or not? How complex of a task can it do? But I think what we've seen is that if you're very creative in how you feed it information, you can access these like emergent, very powerful capabilities.
Yeah.
And we're still exploring the frontier of the knowledge that exists within these models.
Yeah.
And I think so that's like one part, is like the workflows that or the complexity of the tasks that models can take on is like emergent and discoverable. And then the other part is just like how you work with these tools. I think we're going to need new interfaces. Like one example is we started working in our product. We started with a very simple like window where you can describe a report you want to generate. Let's say like, oh, I want a landscape. Give me a landscape of all the companies of the target safety for some given target. Let's say, like, give me a landscape, give me EGFR target safety report.
Yeah.
And I'll go through very diligently and search a bunch of papers, search our internal data, and it will come out with a templated target safety report where it can go through, okay, who else has tried this target? What do we see in the literature? Based on the pathway, where do we think the toxicity liabilities are going to be? What's the clinical data from other EGFR inhibitors? And then you show that to customers and they think, okay, that's just cool. Can I find a way to run this across 1,000 targets or 10,000 targets?
Yeah.
And then you would create a new system where we give customers the ability to run many of these reports in parallel. So you have one template and you just swap out the entity you're getting the model to write about. Like now it's EGFR, now it's TNF, now it's TL1A.
Mm.
And then you just run that at large scale. And then then you send it back. It's like, okay, here's your 1,000 reports about the safety of every different target that you're interested in. And then they think, oh, wow, that's great, but I can't read all this.
Yeah.
So then you get like new systems to help them digest the information
Mm.
and flag, okay, what is the key information
Yeah.
within those 1,000 reports? So I think, when we move to a world where we have all these tools, like doing a lot of work in the background, we're going to need new systems to help humans actually digest that information.
Yeah. It's I find it fascinating because I'm not an AI expert, but you try and stay across what's possible. And then you look at companies like Causally, Exploristics. There's a bunch of fascinating companies doing unbelievable stuff. And you think, well, is there anyone sitting across all of this looking at what's possible today that wasn't even possible last week?
Yeah.
How do you stay across what's out there, what's coming, what's possible? What's your process for keeping abreast of things?
I will say it's pretty hard to keep track because AI is so fast moving now. What I do find very helpful is Twitter, actually. A lot of discussion about AI is on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think also being in the Bay Area is helpful.
Yeah.
OpenAI is here, Anthropic is here. A lot of discussion is just happening in restaurants
Yeah.
among people working at these companies. So there's a lot of like local knowledge diffusion within the ecosystem here. And certainly it takes a lot of time to keep up to date with what's happening because it's both complex and fast moving.
Yeah.
So I would say that we can follow everything, but we try to keep abreast of the main trends and we try to, share with other companies who are maybe they're working in insurance or they're working in like AI applications for fintech or something else. Like what can we learn from them and how are they adopting tools in their industry and what ideas can we bring from legal AI to pharma AI.
Yeah.
So I think those are the main ones. It's just, obviously we try a lot of stuff out internally as well,
Yeah.
but it's like really Twitter and just local information diffusion.
Yeah. No, and I've written a lot about the idea of asymmetric learning. So how are you learning in a way that other folks aren't? And, what kind of advantage do you get from the way that you learn? You've written in posts about how most, launched drugs don't even recoup their own development costs.
Yeah.
So, one of the problems the industry has is its economic model. And I think, you made the point about, different companies having different strengths, but there's a huge range of different costs per company, per molecule that gets approved. Do you see AI making a difference to the economic model, in its current form, or is there a different way of applying it?
I think it's hard to see how AI fundamentally changes the economics of the industry.
Yeah.
I think that like we are a hits driven industry. I think that's gonna stay the same. I don't think the thing that would really change the economics of the industry would be I have some system where I can put in a molecule into a computer and then it tells me what patient or disease this would treat with like perfect accuracy.
Yeah.
And then I don't need to run the clinical trials. I could just like go directly from a molecule to a patient. That's what would fundamentally change the economics. But now I don't see how you can escape things like, running the regulatory process, running RCTs, having to commercialize through a network of doctors and payers because you have to appraise the evidence that you generate because we don't have this certainty about whether or not something works or not.
Yeah.
And I think we learned that it's probably not the right model for our industry to have, just like any company could list their drug on Amazon or something and patients could just buy it.
Yeah.
That probably is not a good idea.
Yeah.
So I think the actual business model and economics will stay roughly the same. I think what AI will help a lot with is reducing cost and timelines. So reducing just, how much work you need to do to write all these documents, analyze those data to make these decisions so you can make decisions faster. That can reduce some of the white space that's maybe like 50% of a trial development timeline. And then I think, you're always constrained a bit by biology, just waiting for biology and clinical trials and site operations. I don't feel like site operations are that amenable to automation. It's just like a people problem. But if you design your trials effectively, you have like very good endpoint selection. Maybe AI can help you figure out opportunities where you can run an 8-week trial instead of a 12-week trial to get an initial readout.
Yeah.
I think we can get some savings there. I don't want to really put a number on it, but I think you can, shave off tens of a percent on the overall development.
Yeah.
Like 10, 20%, something of that magnitude,
Yeah.
very rough of the development timeline. I think in discovery, there'll be a big impact there. We have all these protein design tools, generative binder tools. Those will help us make better molecules. I think it's not going to be a step change. It's going to be a pretty meaningful improvement. But, in the same way we've had other discovery technologies in aggregate making a large improvement.
Yeah.
But like any one technology has not completely transformed the economics of the industry. I think AI is going to be like that. So we'll just have a combination of better molecules coming into the clinic, better clinical trial design, better decision making. And I think in aggregate that will improve timelines, reduce costs,
Yeah.
and that will help improve some of the economics of the industry. But I don't think we're going to see, I think unfortunately, I don't see a way for like AI to get us to, okay, now it's like tech or something in a 10-year time frame.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the more interesting. You watch Twitter and you watch the kind of polarization of folks that think AI discovery is the new thing. You go,
Yeah.
look, these drugs have to behave like any other drug when they hit a pipeline. They're not going to behave differently when they get there. But
Yeah.
you look at companies that are, able to tell you where to put your clinical study because it's more likely to have a positive outcome. And then you see the effects of different clinical trial sites on different modalities, just the way they recruit patients or whatever. And you think, well, look, a lot of this is a knowledge issue, right? So you should be able to address that going forwards. But, that fundamental thing of, as you said, you always had this kind of analogy of if you take an advisory board of like 8 people and there's 7 of them agree on something and one guy doesn't, you still don't know whether he's right or wrong, even though you have that kind of an opinion, and then comes down to the individual physician and what they think about when they're having an individual patient in front of
Yeah.
them. What's the perfect decision process? So how do you influence that kind of decision going forward? That's a human problem for a long time yet.
Yeah. What I do think is true is I think the pharma industry as a whole has been so good at making money for a long time and having high margins.
Mm.
They haven't really had to take a very hard look at every step of the process
Yeah.
and optimize the costs and the time of that process. And I think now, the way that maybe a manufacturer has, right? If you look at the Japanese auto manufacturers as an obvious example, like they've been very rigorous in how they've driven down, how they've like atomized every step of their manufacturing process and how they've driven down costs for each step. And I don't think pharma has had to do that kind of level of optimization. But now maybe with, some of the pricing pressures coming on and the lowering in the rate of return, some people are saying that the rate of return is now negative in the industry. So I think we probably are coming up on a point where the industry is going to have to look more seriously at its cost structure and just invest in more efficiencies. And I think, AI is one way that I think will be quite impactful in the aggregate, but there's also many other, like the problem is so large that there's many other ways that beyond AI to, lower costs. Like maybe all early discovery goes to China. I think China is probably more of like the rise of China as a discovery engine is going to be more impactful or has been more impactful as well in a kind of 5-year time frame than AI will be, I think, even though, AI is very useful.
Yeah, and I was just literally going to raise the idea of China because, within our innovation index, we've kind of tracked China for a while. And it was that they were a discovery engine for a while, but now they're looking to, launch, commercialize their own drugs from China in the way
Yeah.
that Japan was, great for a while, not so much anymore. What else do you see coming from China? There's clearly innovations in AI there that we don't know so much about, as well as the kind of their ability to increase speed of development and a bunch more. How do
Yeah.
you see in China impacting our industry in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I think the obvious one is discovery is like they continue to move up the value chain, right?
Yeah.
So they take a large share of discovery. I think, it's hard to see a world where discovery and like funding preclinical biotechs in the US and Europe is as sustainable now as it used to be.
Yeah.
So I think the funding model of the industry is going to have to change a lot. And I don't think we're going to have these like, oh, I'm going to fund this biotech $200 million and they're going to have some like kinase discovery platform
Mm.
and then like take a few drugs. Like, I think anything that's technology that's not super novel and almost fringe China will just do because they can take 10 shots on goal for your one shot.
Yeah.
They don't even have to be, have any AI to help them make better decisions or anything like that.
Yeah.
They can just throw a bunch of cheap med chemists at the problem and generate a bunch of similar structures and just copy like as soon as you publish, you're working on a target, then they can just, throw a bunch of people at it and beat you to the clinic and run one of these investigator-initiated trials locally, get some clinical data, sell to a pharma, and then suddenly you've had you've lost the race.
Yeah.
So I think the biotechs that get funded and founded in the West need to look quite different. I think they'll look like either very novel fringe biological insights, drugging things that we didn't think were like don't fit into like easily conceptualizable models of a drug, or they'll be really new technologies, combination drug devices, complex cell therapies, things that require really significant expertise to manufacture and develop. So, and I think China will become the discovery, like the same way like Wuxi is now, where everyone sends a lot of their preclinical work. I think it'll just become a source for a lot of like raw assets, and then Western pharma companies will develop those drugs.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because I think that kind of Darwinian environment, you need some water in the pond, basically. And if that water is the kind of biotech funding, which is struggling at the moment in the US, it's not in China for, obvious reasons. It may well be that some of the sources of innovation are going to be coming from there. I wanted to sort of dig into, I know you've written a lot about consciousness and intelligence,
Mm.
natural, artificial. How do you see kind of neuroscience, AI, kind of blurring the line between biological and artificial or synthetic minds?
I think so. Having dug into it, I think we're still pretty far away from understanding
Mm.
just what consciousness
Yeah.
is as. And one of my theories for why that is we don't have good we don't have good sensors, non-invasive sensors to measure brain activity. So we have MRIs or functional MRIs, but those are pretty coarse. They just measure blood flow in the brain. They don't measure actual neural activity.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's also quite hard to access, what exactly is happening in below the cortex. If you do an EEG, you just get like the top level readings from the top level of the cortex.
Yeah.
You don't actually get what's happening in the midbrain or the brainstem. And I think if you look at a lot of the literature on the unconsciousness, it's pretty clear that there is a lot of important functionality that's happening in the thalamus and the midbrain for conscious activity. So I think one way to get closer to solving this problem, like what is consciousness, is developing better sensors to measure brain activity in living conscious organisms. And I think until we have that, it's not very clear to me exactly how we'll really figure out what consciousness is. Like, I think if you look at the history of biology as a science, it's very empirical. It's not really been driven by it's not like physics or math where you have like this mathematical representation and you can just test everything in the maths, and if the theory holds, then that's great. It's been very like driven by empiricism and very driven by new tools. And like typically what happens in biology is you have a new tool and then someone applies that new tool to an old problem and then they make a breakthrough. Like as far back as the microscope, like would we have reasoned about bacteria from first principles? Maybe not. I mean, we actually like the reasoning was bad air or people thinking there's like little microbial particles of living beings. So I think it's similar. Like there's probably something that if we had the right sensor technology, we would be able to understand the mechanisms of consciousness. But now we don't have good sensor data, so we can just speculate. And there's so many different, speculative theories about what consciousness is. Like, oh, it's maybe it's stored in the microtubules, or it's stored in the electrical activity of the neurons and the electromagnetic field, or it's stored in or it's fake or something like that. I don't know. I just think we don't know. It's like so uncertain. We have so little information to go off.
Yeah.
So these brain computer interfaces may be a good.
Yeah, no, it's kind of fascinating. I mean, I studied genetics back in the 80s, and you look at what we're still discovering about DNA and the way it works and the way it doesn't work. And so, I thought we had it mapped back in the 80s, and then you go, no, it's still relevant in 2025. And I guess, and then you look at something like Neuralink, which everyone was skeptical of for a long time, and they go, well, it's maybe you need an engineering mind to look at it in a different way going forward.
I think the thing that's really interesting about biology is it's almost infinitely deep. It's like so hierarchical. Like, take genetics, right? Like, okay, you have epigenetic regulation, then you have, all sorts of mechanisms to repair the DNA, all these control mechanisms we're just discovering. Now we're discovering new ways to edit the genome. So I think, every time you look closer or you get the tools to look closer, you find more and more like detail. It's like fractal almost. Same with, it's like with neuroscience, right? Like you can measure very coarsely what's happening in the blood flow in the brain, and then you can look into the levels of the individual neurons, and then you have in the neurons, actually what's important is, okay, the level of like what proteins or receptors are expressed in the synapse, what channels are expressed in the synapse, what's the level of like intracellular calcium in the neuron. So it's just like it gets so deep, and all these little like the biology has found a way to use every level of hierarchy to do some kind of computational adjacent activity. So I think it's just as we get better tools to look deeper into what's happening at a molecular level, then we'll eventually like slowly unravel the mysteries. I don't think like we have a good sense of what is consciousness or like
And it is interesting. We might even redefine what it is and what it isn't. Stephen,
I'm sure we will.
Stephen Johnson, the author of a lot of books about innovation, on this podcast a couple of years ago. And that sort of revelation of the tools sometimes drive the way that we see things, but inevitably you have a situation where we think that the latest tool gives us all of the answers instead of novel insights, and we tend to behave that way. And I think some of the AI discovery companies are still in that mindset, right? Is that we can map things perfectly now, so it's going to be easy. What we might have found is a new bunch of problems.
Yeah, one thing I also like along this vein is just we use technology as a mental model to understand
Mhm.
ourselves as well. So there's a pretty funny meme that goes through different technologies, and there's a picture of a book, and a guy is saying "Oh man, the human mind is just like a book. It stores all this knowledge, and you can retrieve it." And then there's a picture of gears, "Oh, the human mind is just like a lot of gears."
Yep.
And then there's a picture of a computer. It's "Oh, the human mind is just like a computer." And then there's a picture of an AI lab, some weights from a language model or something. And it's "Oh, the human mind is just like AI." So I think we just find we just use new technology. We map on new technologies to what the mind is.
Yeah.
And we use it as an analogy to understand it, but it's just something we've always done. And it's not really clear that the brain is like a book or like a computer in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. And we find, I know, as folks look into self-driving cars and a bunch of other things, you go, look, there's some things that humans will be good at, and those addressable issues are, that's going to be where we start, but it probably won't be where we finish. I wanted to, maybe in the last few minutes to get into, I know you look at forecasting, probability a lot. So I just want to take that and apply it to, what you think is going to happen in the next 5, 10 years. Give us a kind of wild prediction of something that's going to be your pick for something that's going to change things, CRISPR, personalized medicine, synthetic biology. Where are you putting your money?
So I wrote a whole post with a bunch of predictions for the next 10, 20 years in the Blockbuster post. I feel pretty good about those predictions still. I think one that maybe I want to highlight is I think if you look at the economics of rare disease treatments, there's been a number of gene therapies that have like Bluebird's sickle cell or thalassemia therapy that functionally they work, but maybe they have some unpleasant conditioning or side effects, but actually they do work. They have high efficacy, but they haven't been successful in the market. And part of that is because you have to charge a very high price to recoup your investment to build a sustainable business.
Yeah.
So they can't charge $2 million or whatever it is they want to charge. So, but these are relatively high prevalence monogenic disorders. And there's actually not that many high prevalence monogenic disorders. If you look down the list of all the monogenic disorders with high unmet need, you very quickly run into conditions where you just have a few thousand patients or a few hundred patients, or even tens of patients in the world. So how are we ever going to create treatments for those patients? It's pretty obvious that we can't do it with the current regime where you make a single gene therapy and then you have to, run all the preclinical and NHP talks and then manufacture it, do GMP manufacturing and for that single asset, and you can't change anything about the manufacturing process. And when you've done it, and then you have to run all the trials, and maybe there's only 10 patients in the world, so how do you run a trial for 10 patients in the world?
Yeah.
I just think it doesn't work. So the only way that I see for getting treatments for those conditions is you start approving platforms rather than products. So maybe you approve a CRISPR platform that's a combination of the delivery system plus the CRISPR protein, and then you swap out the guide RNA. And then you recognize that there's some variability in that system. And that means you can, with this one system, you can then treat many different types of patients.
Yeah.
If you look at eye diseases, inherited blindness, some of these mutations are so rare. But maybe you can approve a gene therapy or a CRISPR gene editing therapy to across many different genotypes at once.
Yeah.
So then you can actually make it economic rather than having a single just new molecular entity or a construct that has to get approved separately every time.
Yeah.
So I think we'll move to that kind of world where you're not approving what's not getting approved is the specific molecular construct. You're approving the process for constructing a drug. And that will include some element of software, that will include some element of a delivery system, and then some element of like a programmable or interchangeable editing system.
Yeah. Which is, I've argued for a while that someone like the UK could, well pioneer some of this, because we do have a closed loop system here, right? Of this discovery, utilization, longitudinal patient records, and a very experimental regulatory system as well. So this could be a way that as soon as you remove the commercial side from the equation, suddenly you could have a different system where you can approve things and also take the risks in the same system. But I think we're a way off that still.
Yeah, it's sad for me as someone who is from the UK. It's sad for me to see, yes, how the country has fallen off in life sciences in many ways.
Me too.
I think the UK has or had all the ingredients to be, well, I mean, it was world leading at one point, and I think it had all the ingredients to maintain a world leading position.
Yep.
And I think having, a hospital system integrated with a research system is integrated with some of the best universities in the world is in principle very valuable. But just haven't really used it properly, haven't really been innovative in regulation. I think now the UK does have to do something to recover its position. It would have to do something pretty innovative, like that new platform approval, or finding a way where you can run some aspects of clinical trials in a commercial type setting. Like I know France has an early access program where you can start selling your drug in some cases before it's got a full approval or full reimbursement. And maybe the UK has something similar where you can just very quickly start getting into patients and collecting data in areas of high unmet need.
Yeah, I hope so. Did you say it should be perfectly set for this? But I think it's going to take a bigger leap of imagination than our current government is likely to get anywhere near. Probably the last thing I just wanted to come back to is maybe do you think we look enough at things like cognitive bias? Because I know you've written about this as well in the past. The way that cognitive biases affect the decision-making in pharma. Do you think we're aware of them? Do you think we are doing anything to address them?
I think people are aware of them. I think we should do more to address them. I think of it. Yeah, I think, books like Moneyball and what we've seen happening in other industries where you've really tried to quantify decision-making and make decision-making more rigorous. I think those have proven to be pretty helpful. We know we have a good toolkit for making better decisions. And we've seen that applied to finance. We've seen it applied to some other industries. And I think there's no reason why we couldn't apply some of those same principles in the pharma industry. I'm a big fan of the book Super Forecasting and some of these other books about techniques for making better decisions. I think people know bias is a problem. I think everyone in the pharma industry recognizes that decisions get made for reasons that aren't necessarily good reasons, like sunk cost or people getting too emotionally attached to their drug program. And I think it's just a hard thing to change because the way organizations are set up, it's very siloed. There's a embedded culture. The culture of the pharma industry has been built up over 200 years. How do you rewind parts of that? It's not going to be all in one day or 1 year or even 10 years. But I think things like, some of the work we're doing to make better quantitative data sets, and then some of the work other organizations are doing internally to try and embed more rigorous decision-making, quantitative decision-making into their processes. I feel like it's going in the right direction, but these are big oil tankers to be rude.
Definitely. Alex, I wish we had more time, but we don't. Where are the easiest places for people to find you? Where would you point people?
Twitter is maybe the best, just atelfo, or I do write, my blog is atelfo.github.io.
Yeah, excellent. I'll include those links in the show notes. Alex, thank you so much. This has been a remarkable dive into a bunch of stuff that we don't usually cover. So thank you.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me on.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.